Hey, everybody, welcome to That Expert Show, where you help run the show. I'm Anna Canzano. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode. It is a fantastic one that we have lined up for you today. We're talking all about paying for college, the mystery of how to pay for college, how to access financial aid and scholarships and all those magical elixir funds that make college available and possible for kids. Let's face it, 80% of kids going to college these days have some form of financial aid, but the process can be really complicated and confusing and daunting and overwhelming for families, especially if that kid is a first-generation college attendee, or even if their parents did go to college. That whole application process can feel very, very intimidating. So we're here to help you, walk you through that today. We've got a fantastic expert lined up that will talk with us about how to pay for college, how to apply for financial aid, and even how to evaluate the financial aid package that you do receive from a college, because a lot of times it's like apples and oranges and trying to compare which package is actually more beneficial to you as a family overall. Our guest today is the Director of College Finance and Social Media for Bright Horizons College Coach, which is a service that advises families on educational matters. She's been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Consumer Reports, U.S. News and World Report, all kinds of publications. And she joins us live right now from Massachusetts. Shannon Vasconcelos, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Anna. So happy to be here.
This process has changed significantly over the years, and we were just talking about the FAFSA and the different ways it has evolved in the last 5, 10, 20 years. We were talking about how now the FAFSA, which is the key document that families need to fill out, the student needs to fill out to apply for financial aid, has modernized. It's now available as an app on your phone.
It is, yeah. It's called the My Federal Student Aid app. You can look for that in your app store. And yeah, it was brand new for the last application cycle, the last academic year. And it was a way that the Department of Education decided to do to reach out to more families, make it more likely that students would actually complete the FAFSA. Nowadays, kids are hardly on their computer anymore. They're doing everything on their phone. So the Department of Ed responded to that and made the FAFSA available on a mobile app. Things went well last year, and we're hoping things go just as well for this upcoming academic year when the FAFSA opens up on October 1st.
So October 1st it opens up. This is good timing then. And when are those FAFSA applications due?
So this is a tricky part about the whole process, where there's one standardized day when the FAFSA application opens up, but there is not a standardized deadline of when you need to get your FAFSA in. That deadline is set by each individual school of when they need you to complete your financial aid application. The deadlines can range. Very, very earliest is October 15th, but not many schools do that. You're tending to see financial aid application deadlines coming up from anytime in November if you're applying early action or early decision anywhere, up really through March. If you're applying regular decisions, so really anytime from November to March, deadlines can be popping up. So if you're applying to college this year, you want to check whatever schools you're applying to, check their websites, and they will let you know what their financial aid application deadline is. And I would say,
sorry, go ahead.
Just a general rule, even if you don't have any deadlines until March, the earlier does tend to be the better when we're talking about financial aid. At some schools, it really doesn't matter, and as long as you get things in by the deadline, you're fine. You can even sometimes be late and be fine at some schools. Other schools start to run short on funding as the weeks and months tick by. So if you can get your FAFSA done sooner rather than later, that does tend to be a good idea.
That sounds like a reasonable decision. So what kind of information does a student need to be collecting for that application? Are there a lot of documents involved, or what sort of materials do they need as they prepare their FAFSA?
Yeah, you're going to need some basic name, address, social security number information. The FAFSA is going to ask about the income and assets of the student and the student's parents. So in terms of assets, you want to have, recent bank statements or pull up your bank accounts on your computer so you see about how much money you have in the bank. In terms of your income, the FAFSA has actually made it a little bit easier in the past number of years to provide income information. It used to be that you would have to actually look at a physical copy of your tax return, and the FAFSA would ask you for certain line items, adjusted gross income and taxes paid, and you'd have to match up, and it could be very confusing, which I'm seeing different tax lines here on which one are they actually asking for, which number. And it made it very easy to make mistakes on the FAFSA. But the last number of years, they have had a tool called the IRS Data Retrieval Tool available, where you can basically provide a little bit of information, essentially sort of click a box, and it will import your income information directly from the IRS database. So that has made it a lot easier to fill out the FAFSA in recent years. You don't have to worry about having necessarily copies of your tax returns and figuring out different line items. You can just import most of the income information straight from the IRS. So that's a little bit less paperwork and room for error that you have to worry about.
So should families start thinking about, if they've got like a financial advisor that they work with, or if they know something about how to manage their taxes and whatnot, are there ways that they can be smart strategically but legally when it comes to what they're reporting as their household income, knowing that they have a kid headed to college in a couple of years? And if so, should they be thinking about that when the kids are freshmen or sophomores?
Yeah, the earlier the better. And one sort of tricky thing sometimes about the FAFSA and about families trying to arrange their finances in the most beneficial way so that they qualify for the most financial aid is that the FAFSA looks at your income from 2 years prior to the year you're applying for financial aid for. So it's not something you can think about at the last minute. If you were going to make certain financial moves, you need to make them well in advance. So for seniors in high school right now who are starting college in 2020, the FAFSA that they are about to fill out is asking for their 2018 income. Mm-hmm. And eventually you do have to apply for financial aid for all 4 years of college. So eventually there will be 4 years of income that they're going to look at. And they essentially range from January 1st of sophomore year in high school to January 1st sophomore year of college. Those are the years of income that are going to be looked at on a financial aid application. So ideally you want that income to look as low as possible during those, what they call base years. That's right. What they call it in the financial aid world. Now, for most people who, earn a salary, their income just kind of is what it is. There's right. Not a whole lot you can do about it. One thing you certainly want to avoid doing is artificially inflating your income during one of those base years. And it comes up quite often for folks that I work with in terms of selling stocks or cashing in stock options, which of course a lot of people do to help pay for college. Oh. When you do that, that can create a capital gain on your tax return, and your income looks higher than it otherwise would have been just because you sold some stocks to pay for college. So you want to avoid doing those kind of income producing moves in one of those base years that the colleges are going to look at. So you want to do it either before halfway through sophomore year of high school, or ideally after halfway through sophomore year of college. The other good example of that is folks taking a withdrawal from a retirement account, which again, people do to pay for college, but if you do it in the wrong year, it shows up as income on an aid application and can actually cost you financial aid. So the timing of things can be very important in this process.
That is such a good piece of advice. And again, we're not talking about, encouraging anybody to do anything shady, but it's just being wise about those decisions and the timing of those decisions as you have a child approaching college. And so something I want to touch on.
The other thing, I just wanted to finish up that point. I wanted to make sure that people know the other kind of big tip that I give people about the financial aid applications and what they're looking at is that they look at, again, the students' and the parents' income and assets. Assets held in the student's name are looked at much more harshly than assets held in the parent's name. There is a higher assessment rate in the financial aid formula. The theory being kind of that parents have other financial responsibilities. They need to, be able to retire and put a roof over their heads, fix the roof if it breaks, and maybe put other kids through school. They've got other uses for their assets, whereas kids don't really have major financial responsibilities. Everything a kid has in the bank could be, and maybe should be, according to the formula, going to help pay for college. So kids' assets are looked at more harshly than parents' assets. So that's something for parents, particularly of young kids, to take note when you're saving for college. If you might qualify for need-based financial aid, you probably don't want to save tons of money in your child's name. It will be more beneficial for financial aid purposes to keep the money in your name as the parent, where there's a lower assessment rate.
That is fascinating, because it goes against the grain of what you always tell your kids. Oh, you got to save up your money. But on paper, I can understand why that might become a liability when it comes to the assessment of somebody's financial ability to pay for college. That makes perfect sense.
Exactly. And I always tell families, I think it's great for a kid to have a little savings account to teach them about managing their money. But if we're talking about, tens of thousands of dollars, the majority of college savings should probably be held in the parent's name if you might qualify for need-based financial aid.
Hey, kid, good job saving. Don't save too much.
Right.
That kind of lends itself to the discussion about 529s, because ideally anything that's being saved up for college should be in some form of 529, which, if you want to just offer kind of an explainer, there's all different names that these go by. They're varying by whatever state you might live in. In Oregon, it's the Oregon College Savings Plan, and in other states it might be called something else, but they're all 529 plans with certain tax benefits. Do you want to talk about those and the importance of those as families try to prepare for college?
Yeah, so 529 it's the kind of name of the tax code, like a 401k is to retirement accounts, 529 is to college savings accounts. And a 529 is a tax-advantaged college savings account. The tax benefit from a 529 is that you get all of the growth of the account tax-free as long as you use the money for college. So you end up saving a decent amount of tax money if you're saving long-term in a 529 savings plan, as opposed to in a regular savings or investment account where you're going to pay taxes on the growth of the account each year, on the interest or the dividends or the capital gains. In a regular savings investment account, you're paying taxes on that every year. With a 529, you never pay any taxes on the growth of the account, as long as you use the money for college. So that is the downside to a 529, is that you are restricted in terms of how you can use the money if you want to keep that tax advantage. Now, if you did save in a 529 and your child decided not to go to college, the repercussions of that would be you can still get your money out. You don't lose your money. You can get your money back, but you would have to pay taxes on the earnings of the account plus a 10% penalty for sort of misusing the account, similar to making an early withdrawal from a 401k account. So you do want to be, fairly confident that this is money that is going to go to college. But as long as you are confident about that, it gets you a nice tax break in that you get the growth of the account tax-free on your federal income taxes. And then every state has their own 529, and that can make things confusing. Some states have multiple 529s.
Yeah.
But you are free to invest in any state's 529. You don't have to use your home states. But many states give a state income tax incentive, like a deduction when you contribute to your home state's plan. Like Oregon does that, where you can deduct what you contribute to the Oregon State 529 up to, it's in the ballpark of like $2,500 if you're single, or like $5,000 if you're married. So that's why a lot of people will stick with their home state's plan, because it may provide them a state income tax incentive. But you don't have to. You're actually free to shop around and use any state's 529. And you still get that same federal tax break.
Are there particular states that have plans that you find are better than others? Is there like a top 3 list that you would recommend?
There are many top 3 lists. I don't like to make that choice for folks, but if you do some searching online, you can find lots of list of the quote unquote best 529s out there. I always say that you have to take some of those lists with a little bit of a grain of salt, or you have to at least do your research and understand what those rankings are based upon. Some of the rankings are just based upon earnings, like which plans have made the most money in the past 1 year or 3 years or 5 years. And just because a plan did well last year doesn't necessarily mean it's going to do well next year. So you have to be a little bit more savvy and look at probably some more things besides that, including, when you're choosing a state 529, you want to look at if your home state offers any state tax incentive. That can be a big benefit to choosing your home state's plan. Outside of that, who manages the money? A lot of states contract with investment firms like a Fidelity or a Vanguard, somebody like that, to manage their state plan. So some people just have a strong preference in who they like managing their money, and that's how they make the decision. So you could certainly look at the growth of the plan, the earnings of the plan, how well they've done. You definitely want to look at the fee structure of the plan. That's a huge one. You don't want fees taking away all of your growth on your account. So ideally you want to keep your fees as low as possible, but sometimes there's a trade-off there. So you'd have to do a little bit of research to find the best 529 for you. I'll tell you my favorite website for researching 529s is a website called savingforcollege.com.
Okay.
There's a lot of really great information. So your viewers should definitely check that one out if they're thinking about opening up a 529.
We will include that. For every episode of That Expert Show, we create a tip sheet that summarizes the key information that the expert covers. So we will provide that with a link in the tip sheet after the show, which we will post. So if you have multiple kids, do you have to set up individual 529 plans for each kid, or can you, for example, set one up that is kind of a collection of funds that is distributed if one kid decides to go to junior college and the other kid's headed to medical school?
Yeah, so the way that 529s are set up is that they can only have one beneficiary listed on them at a time, but you can change the beneficiary within the family. So families do theoretically have some options there, but I would say if your kids are close enough in age where they are potentially going to be in college together at the same time, and you're going to want to be making withdrawals for both of them, then you almost certainly want to have separate 529s set up, one for each of them, because again, you can only list one beneficiary on the account and can only be withdrawing for that one beneficiary at any given time. But you can change the beneficiary within the family. So theoretically, if your kids were spaced, 4 years apart where they're not going to be in college at all together, you could just have the one account and list the oldest as the beneficiary to start, spend whatever you need to get them through college, and then change the beneficiary to the younger child when the older one finishes up with college. So you could do that if your kids are spaced far enough apart. You may not want to do that for, maybe a couple different reasons. First of all, just for like equity purposes, like if one kid finds out that you have a college savings account for the other and not for them, that could cause some, conversations at home that you might not like. And also for the way that you're allocating your assets within that account. There's sort of a theory that many financial experts will point you in the direction of, in that when your child's very young, you can be invested fairly aggressively, mostly in stocks, where you're hoping to gain a greater rate of return, but you can also lose some money. But as your child ages, gets closer to college age, and you're going to need that money, you may want to be invested more conservatively, so you don't, when the stock market takes a downturn, you don't lose your whole 529 right before your kid goes off to college. So with that in mind, if your kids are very far apart in age, if you only have one account, you may be invested, kind of too aggressively for one of them, too conservatively for the other. So I think for most people, it's probably a good idea to have separate accounts for each of their kids. And remember, you can change the beneficiary within the family. So if it so happens that one of the kids doesn't end up going to college or gets a great big scholarship, so they don't need that money in your 529, you can change the beneficiary to the other child. You can generally transfer between 529s within the family. So you're kind of not locked into what money is in each separate account, but it probably is a good idea for most people to have the separate accounts.
That makes sense. Thanks for spelling that all out, because there's a lot of details there. You brought up the return on investment and what you can make. Greg on Twitter had a comment, because we always post about the topic for that expert show in advance so people have a chance to post their questions for me to ask you, the expert. And he wants to know, are 529s worth it? I think you're going to answer yes. He is talking about the Washington State 529, where you buy tuition at today's rate, but tuition in Washington has increased 7%. He said he put his money in stocks 20% this year. He thinks he can beat 7% and maybe even 10%. So I can understand that logic where he's looking at the stock market going, well, I can get a much better return just being in the stock market.
Yeah, so the plan that I think Greg is referring to is actually a very specific type of 529 that most 529s actually are not. But there is a type of 529 that some states have called a prepaid tuition plan, where instead of being invested in the stock market like you are with most 529s, what you're doing is actually buying tuition credits. The way they're sold is sort of buying tomorrow's tuition at today's prices.
Tuition futures.
Yes, exactly right. Yes. So if you had $10,000 burning a hole in your pocket and your state offers a prepaid tuition plan, and tuition at your state schools is currently $10,000 a year, you could put that $10,000 in your prepaid tuition plan. You have bought a year's worth of tuition. And if your child isn't going to school for 18 years, tuition might have doubled by the time they're going to college. It might cost $20,000 a year, but you already bought your year for 10. So essentially, with a prepaid tuition plan, your rate of return is the rate of tuition inflation at the schools in your state. Why you would choose one type of plan over the other. And first of all, in most states, it's not an option. Most states don't offer these prepaid tuition plans, but a number of states do. And again, you're sort of locking in tuition. So if you're fairly confident your child will attend an in-state public university and you don't like taking a lot of risk, you might go with one of these prepaid tuition plans where your investment is guaranteed to keep pace with tuition. Tuition inflation in recent years might be somewhere in the ballpark of 2, 3, 4%. That's your rate of return each year. It's not necessarily a stock market rate of return, but it's guaranteed. You're not taking, I can't say no risk, but very little risk, because tuition does tend to go up every year. So you're always making a little bit of money. Now, Washington State was actually an interesting example, because a few years ago, they actually decreased tuition and there was a big tizzy in the prepaid tuition plan.
Yeah.
But usually tuition goes up. So it's a very low risk investment, sort of guaranteed-ish rate of return, as opposed to most 529s are actually in the stock market. You have a menu of maybe 20 or so mutual funds that you can choose to invest in. And you get that stock market rate of return. And you can be in very aggressive funds or very safe funds, depending on your risk tolerance. So for Greg asking that question, it depends on your risk tolerance. It depends on what type of investments you want to choose. You certainly don't have to invest on your own to take advantage of a stock market rate of return. You can get that within a 529. It's just a different 529 than it sounds like what he has, or what he's thinking about is that prepaid tuition plan, which is not going to get you a stock market rate of return, but has lower risk. So you can get a stock market rate of return within a 529, along with the tax-free benefit of the 529. So that's the big difference with a 529 and a regular investment account, is that you're getting the growth tax-free with a 529, whereas with a regular investment account, you're losing, some of that 20% gain that you got, Greg.
Right.
You're losing some of that to taxes. You're paying capital gains tax. So there is a trade-off there. If you're someone who very much likes picking individual stocks and really think you can beat the market average, that you cannot do within a 529.
Right.
You have a limited menu of mutual funds you can choose from. So if you like picking individual stocks and you're willing to take on that risk, you could certainly save for college in a regular investment account. You're just not getting any tax benefit out of it.
How much, this is going to be a real generalized question, but how much should parents be preparing for college these days if their kid is going to a public university versus a private university? Do you have some ballpark ranges for how much they need to have prepared?
Yeah, so national averages in terms of the cost of an in-state public university, it's about $25,000 a year. Out-of-state public university in the ballpark of like $40,000 a year. Private universities, national average is about $50,000 a year, though I actually find that number misleading with the students I work with. Applying to private universities, they tend to be more in like the $70,000 a year range. The most expensive private schools are up around $80,000 a year nowadays. So that's what the sticker price of college. It's insane. It's a lot. Almost nobody can afford to save that much money. What I think is the worst thing that can happen to folks is they hear those numbers and they just get intimidated by the process and say, there's no way that I could save that much money, so I'm just not going to do anything. You don't want to let those numbers intimidate you into inaction, into doing nothing. What I always tell folks is save whatever you can. Try and look at your budget, figure out where you can stretch things and save as much as you can, but it's probably going to be enough to totally cover 100% of the sticker price of college. But you know what? That's okay, because in fact, as you referenced at the beginning of the program, Anna, the fact that around 80% of students get financial aid. Most students are not asked to pay full sticker price for college. The vast majority of students get some type of scholarship or grant discount on the price of college. And there's certainly ways you can be strategic about applying to colleges that might be more willing to give you a discount. But you don't have to worry about saving those huge numbers unless you want to give your child, unlimited options and you can go wherever you want to go. Then maybe you want to save the full sticker price. But the fact is that most students are not paying full sticker price. So you just save whatever you can, and then you apply strategically to colleges that might be most willing to give you a discount, and you can make some decisions from there.
How do you know which of those colleges would be more willing to give you a discount? Are there certain colleges, or is there somewhere that parents can go or students can go to look at that evaluate the generosity of colleges in offering financial aid, like real financial aid, not in the terms of like student loans where you get to incur debt, but grants and free money?
Yes. So a few different resources. I actually just wrote a blog post that maybe you can link to in the tip sheet. It's on our blog, which is blog.getintocollege.com. Go to that blog and in the search box type most generous colleges, because I just wrote a blog post that lists it's currently 77 colleges in the United States that guarantee that they will meet the full calculated need level of every student that they accept. So those are essentially the 77 colleges that tend to be most generous with need-based financial aid. So that is a very important distinction. These are not necessarily colleges that are generous with merit scholarships. So you have to be needy, according to the calculations, to qualify for aid from these schools. But if you are, they tend to be very generous and will meet your need and will make it affordable for you to attend that school. So check out that blog post for colleges that are particularly generous with need-based financial aid.
And we will certainly include that, yeah.
That's perfect. The other big way to get a discount from college is in the form of merit scholarship. So this is not based on your family's finances. This is based on the students and often their academics or their attributes that make them a particularly attractive candidate to one school or another. So colleges use their merit scholarship money as a recruitment tool. They're going to offer they've got their limited pot of merit scholarship money. Right. They have to decide who they're going to offer it to. they're going to offer it to the students who stand out the most in their applicant pool. So you can imagine, if you could be a straight A student, but if you only applied to like Harvard, Princeton, and Yale, where everyone's a straight A student, you don't stand out in that applicant pool. You're not going to see merit scholarship funding. But you could be more like a solid B student. And if you applied to some colleges where the average is more like a C, you as a B student look very good. And you're very likely to see some nice scholarship offers, much more so than that A student who only applied to the most selective schools. So the real strategy in terms of maximizing merit scholarships is apply to some schools where you're going to stand out from the crowd. Looking at your grades, your test scores, are they above average for this school? Because that's where you're likely to see the most generous scholarship offer. So you want to make sure when you come up with your list of schools that you're going to apply to, you want that list to be balanced. And sure, have a couple reach schools on the list, see what happens, but make sure that's balanced out with some more like safety schools where you're well above average, you're going to look particularly good. Those are going to be the schools that are most likely to recruit you with significant merit scholarship money.
And as a matter of fact, I mean, I know that we went into this interview saying that we were going to cover both financial aid and scholarships, but I love the information that you are sharing so much that I want to ask if you would come back for a follow-up interview that is focused solely on scholarships, because I think you have a lot to offer folks.
Absolutely. I would love to. I know paying for college is a huge topic. It's hard to get to everything in a half hour.
It is.
But yeah, I would love to come back and talk more specifically about scholarships. That would be great.
Okay, let's do that. And appreciate your time today. I could sit here probably with you for another hour and a half on this topic. I want to let our viewers know that Shannon will be checking out the social media posts. So if you have additional questions about financial aid, feel free to post them after the interview. She has generously offered to go in and answer them after the fact. Thanks so much for your time today, and we'll see you again soon.
You're very welcome. Take care.
And thank you for joining us for this episode of That Expert Show. Boy, she really knows her stuff, doesn't she? I want to hear more from her because she obviously is so well researched in this topic. So we will do a whole separate episode just on scholarships themselves, because it sounds like she has more to offer on that particular topic. If you're watching live, great. I know that sometimes it's hard to watch things live, so you can always go back after the fact and connect with us on social media. Watch the replays on Facebook. I'm on Facebook at Anna Canzano. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at That Expert Show. You can also go to thatexpertshow.com and view all the previous episodes and tip sheets. We also put our episodes on our YouTube channel, which you can find just by searching for That Expert Show. And we kick this content all back out to you as a podcast. So Apple, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, all those good places. You can listen to the show as you're just going about your day as well. So hope you got something out of that episode. I sure did. Feel free to share it with a friend, because I know this information could be valuable to a lot of people in your social circle. And join us for the next episode of That Expert Show, where you help run the show.